everybody to the first Palm Beach Poetry Festival. My name is Miles Coon. I'm the director. It's my pleasure to have you here in the audience for Mary Cornish's presentation about the poem as Riddle and the poet as Riddler. Mary received her Master of Fine Arts degree in creative writing poetry at Sarah Lawrence College. And after graduation, she was awarded a Stegner Fellowship in Poetry at Stanford University. Her poems have been published in Poetry, New England Review, Alaska Quarterly Review, Ratapalix, and Poetry Northwest. Her work more recently appeared in Poetry 180, A Turning Back to Poetry, an anthology of poems selected by Poet Laureate Billy Collins. Ms. Cornish is also the author-illustrator of a number of books for children. It's my great pleasure and honor to present Mary Cornish.
I told Miles I'm going to get up here and I'm just going to even forget my name. He said, that's okay, you can use mine. I'm Miles Coon. Workshop by Riddle. First I have to do some disclaimers. I'm not erudite about the riddle. It's a huge field of study. I am just passionate about it and its relationship to poetry. But you pay the price for that passion because in your brochure it says interactive. You could forget about that. I'm just going to tell you as much as I know about the riddle as fast as I possibly can. There will be, so you guys won't get a word in edgewise. But the workshop people tomorrow, we will have a chance to, to play with the riddle, to see what it means in relation to our own work. But I will try, as we talk about it, to talk about how we cop these things, how we steal them, how not only they make their way naturally into our work, but how intentionally, because after all, riddle involves intent, how we can steal them for our own work. And I think you will find that that's possible in a variety of ways. Riddles have existed for 25 centuries, and they exist in all cultures that ever have been and now that exist. And what's more, they exist even sometimes not only with the same motifs, but across geography and across centuries, even the same phrasing. It's just really uncanny. There are huge traditions of riddles in Jewish weddings, where they give the riddles to the couple weeks before they're married. There is a great tradition in Finland of riddles. Every African country has just a remarkable history of riddles. In the Kikuyu, it's a contest between young people. It's done around a campfire. It's sung, and they have decorated gourds. They shake, it's very musical, and it's so elaborate that there can be 127 back and forth riddles. They even bet things like cattle on their great riddling ability. Supposedly, now I haven't really actually been able to find any kind of documentation on this, but supposedly there were gallows riddles, neck riddles, that if in fact you could solve it, as a criminal, you were safe from the gallows. And what must have been, I don't know if it was a part of myth or or reality. The riddles exist, but whether or not they worked is another matter. That there were slave riddles, that if in fact you could answer them, it would set you free, which just almost breaks my heart. The notion that if you were clever enough, linguistically, to solve something, you would earn your freedom. I would like to think that at least in one case, someone managed to do that. The way I'd like to begin is with the Bantu, because there's an invitation, which just seems wonderful to me. That there's an invitation to the riddle. It's up here at the top. The Riddler says, take hold of the riddle. And the audience says, I've got it, I've caught it, I'm taking hold of it. As if it were an actual object, like a rope I were throwing to you, or a ball, something that engages both of us on either end. There is even a single word in Kalanga, which is another African language. I'm not going to know how to pronounce this. If anybody does, I'd love to have you help me. It's Ngalibani up here. Let us puzzle with one another. Wouldn't you? It's a challenge. So you walk up to somebody and you say it. And it's like, Now we are locked. Now we are locked in the riddle. In every culture where the riddle still has its sense of magic, there are taboos, as there are around anything that's magical. And so some of those taboos are that the riddle is usually said indoors and not out, and it is never said in daylight, never. So, and there are admonitions, like, you will go bald, you will grow horns, you will grow horns. So if anyone would like to leave before we tempt whatever riddle gods there are, I can't afford to get any thinner. But we have lost all of that authentic power. You know, we've kind of gotten disconnected from it, although we have a most remarkable tradition of riddles in English. Anglo-Saxon riddles are just a brilliant rabbit hole down which to fall. They just are stunningly beautiful. If you have access to a library, the Exeter Riddle book is just one of the most remarkable documents around. And I will show you a number of examples from that. But they have, especially in American English, been relegated to kind of like the children's playground. Which would seem in a way kind of a shame to demote them this way. But, you know, listening to the panel last night, one of the first things they said is, if you're not playing, it's not going. It starts in play. And you can feel that so much in children's riddles, and how goofy they get, and how much they love them. And I guess it depends on how high your standards are, but mine must be pretty low, because I just think they're fun. That famous one, like, what's black and white and red all over? Immediately sets up a contradiction. I find that this is important in the riddle structure, because in fact, logically, if it's black and white, it can't be red all over, because it's black and white. So it sets up the anti-logic, but then of course there is the play of the homonym. It's because it's red, and then it's like a trick on you. Folklorists and anthropologists call this a shrewd question, as opposed to the riddle, but it is in the same category of the riddle, because it begins to explore language as unstable, which is where we are when we're in the riddle, in that instability. So, and the next one, I love this. What's green and sings rock and roll music? Elvis Parsley. I just adore that. It's so great. Now you had another one. What was it?
What's green and goes 90 miles an hour? That's a frog in a blender.
The dark humor of riddles. The dark sayings. And kids love those, don't they? The darker, the better. The singer, if they involve Santa and disasters. The real mistress of this kind of wordplay is Heather McHugh, and if you're not familiar with her work, you need to get on her website. She's just way out there. And right now on her website, she has these anagrams for every kind of poetry in the world. Have you seen that lately, Tom? Like English poetry, and then she has this anagram that sums up English poetry and Indian poetry. It's just wonderful. But she has, I separated at least this title, Arm and Peck, like arm and peck, right? Arm and Peck, the two Adillos. And then you read that and you think, and then it's like they're like conjoined twins, Arm and Peckadillo, you know, and they're so really odd as a couple. You know, an armadillo and a peccadillo is just wonderful. I love it. So this is where it starts. It starts with the play of language and the fact that language is unstable. You have arm, you have peck, and suddenly they become the two Adillos. This is language that is shifting on us right as we are saying it. And Heather plays with that shift, and you might think of stealing this tactic. She plays with that shift in this poem, Etymological Dirge. Heather's a big fan of the OED, and this poem is based on the growth of the word, even the dictionary growth of the word. It starts with its roots in Anglo-Saxon or English, or in Indo-European roots, whatever the root of the word is, and it moves as the word moves out into the world and takes on different meaning. But listen to this poem, it's so splendid, because while it is literally talking about the dictionary movement of a word through time, it really lifts off the page, and it's about something very other than just the dictionary. So actually, so I don't hear myself all the time, who would like to read Heather's poem for us? Yeah.
'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear.
You see that?
Yes. Calm comes from burning. Tall comes from fast. Complete doesn't come from come. Person comes from mask. The kin of charity is whore. The root of charity is dear. Incentive has its source in song and winning in the sufferer. Afford yourself what you can carry out. A coward and a coda share a word. We get our ugliness from fear. We get our danger from the Lord.
Yeah, we get our danger from the Lord. And that relation to that, to 'twas grace that taught my heart. And so this poem does celebrate that at the heart of language is this kind of flux. So which takes us actually to the father of the riddle from the Heraclitus, or Heraclitus, from the 5th century BCE. His theory of logos, which is the word or meaning, was that it had flux at the center, that the nature of things is not fixed. You know, we would like to think it is. Until those big events cross our lives and the fabric of the world is torn and we realize that things are inescapably in flux. Things are in process all of the time, that there is a deep interconnectedness of apparent opposites, a connectedness you cannot possibly escape, and that despite our attempts to understand the world, Heraclitus says, things keep their secrets, which is why we love poetry, because it's about things and secrets and access to those secrets. You can feel this even in the corniest kid stuff, that flux. What birds are always unhappy? Bluebirds. How do you make a lemon drop? Hold it and then let it go. What did the chicks say to the miser? Cheep, cheep. It isn't just about language play, although it is. It's also about a relationship between things, a mysterious relationship between things as the world shifts under your view. Climate change. This is good, 'cause these are really my crutches. They're more for me than you. Sort of thing. Okay, next. Children, these are going to be great examples. Children imitate riddles all of the time, and they don't quite get it. They know it's language play, so they come up with great language stuff. And they also know that it is something more serious, because children play very, very seriously, and I think this came up in the panel as well, that it is a kind of deep play that child psychologists talk about all the time, where really deep learning goes on. We're not just talking dodgeball, move around on the playground. We're talking about something essential being learned here, something set spinning from which they learn. And they do almost always get what Robert Frost calls sentence sound, so that even if they don't quite get how a riddle works, if you hear a riddle at a distance and you don't hear the content, what Robert Frost says is that there is a tone to language, a patterned tone to language, and you hear that rhythm and that sound that belongs to that pattern. And children hear that in the riddle. So here are some that they've made up, and you can see that they're trying to also get at some kind of mystery in the world, some relatedness between things. Where are my examples? What's in the dirt and does a hole, and then it's inside the hole, an ant? What did the big hill say to the little hill? You're too fancy to be walking around. How come you need hair? To be not bald-headed. I love this one. This girl was wonderful. What's big, 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 like a fig in the dog? And she had like no solution. And I'm thinking, now this girl is at the heart of the riddle, because it's like insoluble. Who knows what that fig is doing in that dog, right? You should try this away with your kindergartners. It'd be so great, wouldn't it? And they have a sense that there is something wonderful at the heart of this activity. And then, of course, the riddle deepens, and it deepens first with contradiction. Like I said, what's black and white and red all over? Here is the pattern of contradiction in terms of logic. It's impossible to have A minus B when B is an integral part of A. How do you subtract it and still have A? You don't. Suddenly A isn't A anymore. It's B. Or suddenly A is both A and B.
You give it a negative value.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Then it becomes a different identity. Then it becomes a negative value. Exactly. So here are some of them. This famous one. When is a door not a door? Right? When it's ajar. And so, of course, it's like, oh, you know, it's that wordplay. It's that homonym wordplay. But it's not just that. Because it's drawing an image equivalency. When is a door not a door? Even though you hear the homonym, you also see a jar. And the idea that a door equals a jar goes, you know, it messes with your head, and that is what metaphor is about. It's that kind of thing that Nicole said they were looking for in manuscripts. That kind of thing that rewakens language, that isn't language that has died between us, but rewakens us to the possibilities of where those truly original relationships in the world are. This one is African. What is the white hut which has no door? Because of course you need a door to get into a hut, right? An egg. What has eyes but can't see? A potato. So the minute we start entering this world of contradiction, which still in fact are simply really shrewd questions in terms of folklorists, we are entering the serious world of Keats's negative capability, where Keats says, this is at the heart of poetry, and that being a poet is the ability to enter that negative space. So if you were a visual artist, there is of course the positive space, right? There's the ladder. And it's this concrete material object. And it has sides and it has rungs. But there is also the negative space, which any visual artist knows. The space between the rungs, the space around the sides, and that defines the object as much as its positive presence. You don't have the one without the other. As Heraclitus says, those things are bound together. There is that deep interconnectedness in those opposites. And what Keats says is, you need to be in the space of the non-ladder that is the ladder. You know, this is that riddle. Being inside that and being, not only being comfortable, Aristotle even says, we love that space. We love that space. There'll be a quote later, because I can't remember it. But, so there is an ambiguity at this point, and lines of equivalency. The poet as enigma maker, and if you take a look at this, because I don't think we always take a look at kind of how a metaphor works. I mean, everybody's way here. You guys see up around it? If not, just move somewhere. Don't worry. Well, no, I mean, don't worry about upsetting any of the talk. So we know the object. Like, say if it's my love, right? This is the object to whom you want to, like make this comparison, with which you want to make a comparison. So you're Robert Burns, so you say, my love, and over here you have a red, red rose. In the real world, the love and the red, red rose are not equals. You know, they're two separate objects that have nothing to do with each other. So you say, my love is like a red, red rose, and here's this part where they overlap. I don't know. They're both beautiful, they're both thorny, they're both, what? They're both vital. So this is interesting. I mean, only as interesting as it is original, but when Robert Burns first said it was probably more interesting. So here is this comparison, but we are used to comparisons. In fact, they're part of cognitive learning. Everything that's new, we compare to what we already know. So comparison is a way we function in the world, and it isn't astonishing, but what is astonishing is when you say something equals something else. The rose equals the love. And then it does that thing. A door equals a jar. And then that confusion sets in. So let's take a look at Heather's, because it's, as usual, way over the top. It says he's the rock. So there's a he, and the he equals a rock. It's not that he's like a rock. And what's more, then she sets it spinning as a riddle, if he's a rock. And then not only is he going to shape-shift through the poem, but so is the I in relation to the he. So it stuns us all the time. It's constantly awake. If he's the rock, then I'm the water. If he's the water, I'm the wind. If he's the wind, I must be moonshine driven in wavelengths to rock. You know, it's beautiful. And then she complicates it further by saying it's a new poem, addressed to God or man or both. So not only is the I and the he set spinning, but so is whoever it is being addressed. We can see this if we, let's isolate a few. Oops. Find Merlin. These are so beautiful and easy to see. If you're not unfamiliar with Merwin's Asian figures, that's another thing to look up. Again, the object half is clear, so you ask yourself, how is A like B? Here is a simile. A liar is like an egg in midair, which I think is pretty wonderful. But it isn't as astonishing because, as I said, it's a comparison. So even though it's wonderful, it has a kind of, I don't know, it has kind of brackets around it. You don't take it out too far. On the other hand, when the image is open, which is what we want to do as poets, we don't want to make it indecipherable, but we don't want to make it closed down too much either. The mouth is one gate of hell. The minute you draw that equivalency, the mouth is one gate of hell, then it becomes more curious as a saying. You have the mouth, and the mouth is clear, the mouth is the object. But saying is one gate of hell, we say, you know, what does that mean? It means what? That there are lots of gates to hell, of which the mouth is one, right? But if the mouth is a gate, then you're saying, okay, so it's an opening. And in what way is the mouth an opening to hell? Is it because one takes in and takes in and takes in? Is this about consumption? Is it about what comes out of the mouth? Language that's foul, lies. Lying is one gate. But we aren't quite sure because the image is not shut down. The image sets that riddle spinning because metaphor is riddle. How is A like B? In what way is A not B? And it makes the shape of things, not just the language, but the shape of things is in flux as well. All nature is in process. So all of these things are shifting when we ask the riddle. Neglect is a dog in a dead man's house. So not only is neglect a dog, you're working on that, right? Neglect is a dog, but then it goes further. Neglect is a dog in a dead man's house. And you're thinking, ooh, so how is a dog in a dead man's house different from any other dog? And what kind of shape is that dog in that dead man's house? And you can't help but imagine, I mean, the dead man is in the house. So there suddenly is that dead man and that body and that dog and that house, and all of it is neglect. So what it does is stay open in its possibilities. I think when the young woman asked the question yesterday, what about a poem having more than one meaning? Absolutely, you want the reader to be in the ballpark, you know. You don't want the reader to have like the keys to the universe to open your little box of an indecipherable poem so that they feel excluded. On the other hand, many of us write poems with agendas, and they are dangerous poems to write. Because they're boring. I thought I was going to say like politically. No, I mean, they are like dangerous because they shut the poem down. Because they underestimate us as poets, they underestimate the reader, they underestimate the beautiful flux in the world and in language, those possibilities. A poem with an agenda, like you know where you're going, a poem with a metaphor that's shut and that you have the keys to, and you know exactly how you're gonna, you know, what you're gonna do with it, is like a horse with blinders on. You know, you put those blinders on a horse and he absolutely gets to the destination, and he gets there fast. It's really efficient. But he didn't exactly have much fun along the way. You know, he didn't see anything. The minute you take the blinders off that poem, that horse of a poem, and you give the horse his head and he just kind of goes where he goes, it can do so many more interesting things. And if you can find metaphors that are like taking the blinders off of all of us as readers, that lead us into territory that is riddling territory, it becomes more interesting. We're going to take some, oh, here's the Aristotle, so I'll read it. Most felicitous sayings rely on metaphor and a capacity to deceive beforehand. We have even more obviously learned something if things are the opposite of what we thought they were, and the mind seems to say to itself, how true, I was mistaken. So Aristotle is saying not only is it about being capable of being in Keats's negative kind of space, negative capability, but taking a certain amount of pleasure in finding that the world is other than you imagined. The notion of deception is interesting here because the English dictionary says actually that the Riddler intends to misdirect, intends to lead you astray. And it's like a kind of flirtation and a kind of quicksand that the Riddler is leading you into. But then it says, so that the riddle can be guessed at, which I find very interesting language. It doesn't say, so the riddle can be guessed. It says, so the riddle can be guessed at, which means we don't really much care about the solution. We care about the guessing at, the guessing toward the world. Let's take a look at our beautiful tradition, which is Latin and Anglo-Saxon riddles. Latin riddles, we're going to look at some by Symphosius from the 4th century CE. This one's called River and Fish. Somebody read River and Fish that isn't me. It's easy. Miles, read me River and Fish.
Sweet purlings in an earth-walled inn resound. Within that inn a silent guest is found. Together guest and inn are onward bound.
So the Roman riddle, or the Latin riddle, puts the title up above, puts the answer up above. It's almost always superscribed. And it makes this little jewel-like metaphor. Does this little faceted jewel thing. There are almost always 3 lines. Symphosius wrote like 500 or 300 or something of these little jewels. But they don't do the bizarre lyrical work that Anglo-Saxon riddles do. Here's one by Altelm, the Bishop of Sherborne, who lived about 500 years later. And he wrote Latin riddles, but he also wrote in the Anglo-Saxon vernacular, and those are the wildest, most alive ones. Once I was water, full of scaly fish, but now I'm something else, by fortune's wish. Through fiery torment, I was made to grow as white as ashes, or as glinting snow. This is just, I just think this is a remarkably beautiful poem that goes way beyond ingenuity into alchemy. It goes into the way that the things of the world change shape by some large element of transformation. And of course, it is not about the answer that it's about, because the answer is salt. Right? Which is also lovely, because here's the salt, and it's like so plain and so simple. But of course, it's really about the soul, or it's about so many other things, I think. It's about man. And so when the salt speaks, it's mankind speaking through the salt. It's the way that we recognize ourselves and what the objects of the earth have to tell us. So there's a kind of way that the world expands, and it doesn't really matter if the poem is about a storm or a worm or a book. It does that odd business when it's one of these Anglo-Saxon poems. We're going to do another one. This is from the Exeter Riddle book, the next one. Somebody else read this wind one. The wind carries small creatures.
The wind carries small creatures over hill slopes and headlands dark, coated, black-bottomed, bursting with song. They churn and clamor like a troop on wing, winding their way to wooded cliff walls, sometimes to the halls of men, singing a name song.
Yeah. And there's no answer to this. There aren't any answers. They've been lost to the Exeter Riddle book. So all of the scholars argued for centuries, I love that, about what Altheim's doing, in his poem. There is a fake answer, because the Riddler wrote a fake riddle answer, which I will read to you, but none of them is the real answer. So one of the wonderful things is that this Oxford English Dictionary notion that the Riddler intends to confuse and misdirect. One of the possibilities is that it's like that Bantu invitation. What the Riddler intends to do is engage and not disengage. He has that disinclination to disengage. It's like grab a hold of the other rope of this riddle And because there's no answer, there's no letting go. Imagine writing an Anglo-Saxon riddle. I mean, it's very possible that this poet had in mind a single answer. But 11 centuries later, people are arguing about the answer. And I call that engagement. You know, I love that. Here's what he writes. Could I be swallows, starlings, musical notes, or martins, jackdaws? Could I be bees or swifts, raindrops, gnats? Who am I? Tell me. And that's the anagnosis of the riddle. Anagnosis is that Greek term for those large moments of understanding, like when Oedipus recognizes that he is the disease of his people. That large self-awareness of one's place in the universe, one's identity. And that's what the riddle is asking, which is no small question. Who are we? What is the nature of matter? What is the nature of consciousness in matter as opposed to consciousness in man? And it takes the most humble things of the world with which to ask these questions. And if that's not lyrical poetry, I don't know what is. Okay, so let's change. Here's one where it becomes very easy to see because the subject is the same in both. An anchor. Okay, so one, how are we doing it? I'm just kidding. Do you feel like you're barely hanging on to the tails here? The first one is the Latin riddle, anchor. My twin points are bound by an iron bar. I wrestle with the wind, struggle with the sea. I probe deep waters. I bite the earth. Oh, pretty great. Even for a Latin one, I bite the earth. It's partly because those Anglo-Saxon sounds are so great. Another symphosius. Still, listen to the difference between that and this one, again, Exeter Riddle Book. In battle, I rage against the wave and wind, strive against storm, dive down, seeking a strange homeland, shrouded by the sea. In the grip of war, I am strong and still, in battle rush rolled and ripped in flight. Conspiring wind and wave would steal my treasure, strip my hold, but I seize glory with a guardian tail. As the clutch of stone stands hard against my strength, can you guess my name? So it goes much more kind of complicated places. Still, it is a kind of flirtation and quicksand. Poetry is not information. That came up again in the panel last night. How we are inundated by information. And now even more with the internet. All that information, all those news programs, 24-hour news on CNN, all of the advertising, and poetry is that large respite of kind of like impede the information, impede it, and in that impediment, in that riddling about language and the possibilities of communication, there is a kind of wonderful thing that can happen there. So this is asking as well about the nature of the material world, which of course before the chart of elements, one more piece of information, was really not quite known. If you look up old stuff about the periodic table when they're trying to find out, they thought that wood was an element because it could transform and be ashes and had a relationship to fire. It was called like woodphonium or something great. And so imagine before you knew whether or not dragons were real, if dragons were an element, if there was a dragon asleep in the wood, I think this is a notion of the world that we just can hardly grasp because we really believe science. We really believe science's models are the real models, the really controlled world. Then there are tsunamis, and then control, I don't know. It starts to be a bit different. The theory is that the objects, they're called tenors in riddles, the objects that are in them, the answers that they are the things that would naturally pertain to the Anglo-Saxon world. So you're going to expect that it's going to be anything around a farm, because it's agriculture. It'll be farm tools, it'll be creatures in the woods, creatures in the barnyard, it'll be the cleric, it'll be church stuff, it'll be whatever surrounded the Anglo-Saxon world. But it gets to be much more complicated than that because, and I'm going to have to read this, because it's too important for me to try to remember. This relationship is really kind of mysterious and leads to other interesting theories of the riddle that the things that people have chosen is more mysterious than you think. A man named Archer Taylor wrote a list of 1,800 riddle topics, riddle answers, and you would think they would be full of like riddles about people, riddles about God, these things that we're wondering. But listen to this description. But why would butter churns, looms, plows, wagons, and wine casks be the subject of riddles more than people? Why are few abstractions riddled? There are next to no examples of riddles about love, praise, glory, despair, envy, good, evil, or death. Of almost 1,800 riddles in Taylor's study, only 6 have death as their solution, and I love this part. Pumpkin vines have as many. Isn't that good? Oddly, only 1 describes a rose. There are no entries for wolves, ravens, or eagles, though they play an important role in other genres of folklore, like heroic poetry and fables. Cats and mice come into any farmyard, get short shrift, and dogs don't fare much better. In a world where the church and its rituals played an important role in people's everyday lives, there is only one dull riddle for which the solution is the devil, father of sins, and no riddle at all for which the solution is God. Although there are more than 70 for laid, hatched, or broken eggs. So I find this a world in which I am really comfortable. I like this world of eggs. So, somebody read this one, which is another lovely. This questioning of the nature of the material world. I was locked in a narrow nest. Yeah. Anybody doing it?
I was locked in a narrow nest. My beak found below the water, and the dark died. The sea surged, where my wings woke, my body quickened from the clutch of wave and wandering wood. Born black, streaked white, I rise from the womb of waves on the wind's back, sailing over seas back. Who am I?
Begin that Anagnosis question. Who am I? And the various answers over the centuries have been a barnacle goose, which is a specific kind of goose, a bubble, an anchor, a water lily, or something less tangible, like a baptism. Now, it's hard to come up with a unifying theory of the riddle. Here is, this is also to remind me to tell you this man's name. Craig Williamson did the translations that we've used of the Anglo-Saxon, the Exeter Riddle book. He writes, all things shift in the body of nature and the mind of man, but the flow, the form, and the movement remains. As the mind shifts, it shapes meaning. When is an iceberg a witch warrior? When it curses and slaughters ships. So there is that power of metaphor making that as the mind shifts, so do the objects of the world. And that helps us come to this kind of, although not a unifying theory, something that Northrop Frye proposes about the riddle, which I just think is fascinating. Northrop Frye says that man has kind of usurped the position of magician, because after all, he has consciousness, he has action, he has verbal ability, and so he has assumed power over the things of the earth that have actually then fallen into silence, although they are capable of consciousness. And that the magician is capable of reversing this spell, this charm. And the magician can turn and invite the object to speak. And this is called prosopopoeia, which is that I, that what am I? The object turns and starts addressing in an I. And at that point, something critical shifts. For one thing, the things of the earth are given power. They speak. Another thing is that then, of course, man enters into relationship. a different relationship, not the relationship of the magician with the object, but the relationship of equals. Now we're talking to each other. And what's more, the magician becomes more powerful, as does the poet, because the things of the world are speaking to him, and he begins to know the secrets that they hold. Because they open their mouths and they speak for themselves about their nature. So his power grows in that discourse that he has with objects. And Northrop Frye says that's why the voiceless objects are chosen. Because the rose is already in relation to humans. The rose is the voice of love. The dog is the voice of loyalty. The eagle is the voice of courage. So when you turn and suddenly the wheel, the rope, the hedgehog start speaking, it's because these are the voiceless. And this is the voice that the magician is interested in. So let's see where some of the, let's go fast into some modern. Here's a mother goose, just as a little transition. Little Nanny Etticoat in a white petticoat and a red nose. The longer she stands, the shorter she grows. I just love this image. And besides which, there's that contradiction, the longer she stands, the shorter she grows. But the minute you know this, that it's a candle, the riddle is over. It's not like one of those engaging Anglo-Saxon riddles. This is, in fact, that riddle about riddles that is, what is it that's something? Wait, what is that? I don't know, it's too complicated for me. Oh yeah, when one doesn't know what it is, then it's something. But when one knows what it is, then it's nothing. And the answer is a riddle. And that's how this one functions. We know what it is, so now it's kind of nothing. But oh, look at Richard Wilbur. If you don't fall in love, you're in the wrong place. Huh?
If a child gets older, the name gets shorter.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Here's a Richard Wilbur poem, a riddle. Where far in forest I'm laid, in a place ringed round by stones, look for no melancholy shade, and have no thoughts of buried bones. For I am bodiless and bright, and fill this glade with sudden glow. The leaves are washed in underlight, shade lies on boughs like snow. Richard Wilbur was interviewed by a man named John Graham, who was so proud that he knew this was a campfire, right? And he kept trying to make Richard Wilbur say it was a campfire, confess that the answer is a campfire. And Richard Wilbur kept saying, well, yes, but then there are all of these things about buried and stones and bodiless, but Graham was having none of that. And so he kind of lectured Richard Wilbur on how the poet has a responsibility to his audience to come up with the answer. And so, humbled, Richard Wilbur said, okay, it's a campfire. But of course it's not, because it is and it's not, because it's A and not A, because it's A and also B, because that's what a metaphor is, an open-ended metaphor, like a mouth that's a gate of hell. It's open-ended, and so it is more than one thing at a time. And that's why it speaks to us through the centuries. That's why literary riddles last, why poems last. Why it's important to find out, if you were sent to prison for 20 years, what poem would you take with you? What poem would you memorize to keep you company every day of the year? One that stayed open, one that talked to you every single morning, where it didn't matter that you couldn't look out. One that kept the things of the world right with you. Those anchors and those hedgehogs. And not stuff like pity, grief, despair, those big things. Here is just another lovely one by Wilbur in 2 parts. It looks like a Roman riddle because the names are superscribed. But look at how complicated it is. It's definitely Anglo-Saxon riddles just given titles. But the titles are less answers than they are naming the voice of who's speaking. But even that isn't a solution, because the voice is not just the milkweed. Anonymous as cherubs over the crib of God, white seeds are floating out of my burst pod. Oh, look at that. Isn't that wonderful? Burst pod. But what power had I before I learned to yield? Shatter me, great wind, I shall possess the field. And beneath that, of course, a stone. As casual as cow dung under the crib of God, I lie where chance would have me, up to my ears in sod. Why should I move? To move befits a light desire. The sill of heaven would founder in such as I aspire. You know, so here he has over and under and heaven and earth and spirit and flesh and lightness and weight and is speaking of so many possibilities and with such beauty and such rhythm. You know, because of course these are also beautifully crafted poems in terms of sound. We're going to look at an Emily Dickinson, the mistress of Enigma, herself. All those hyphens, all that questionable, arguable punctuation. Now, Emily Dickinson has a lot of what people would argue are not true riddles because they're about abstracts, those pain, love, beauty, death, despair things. But she has, I'm sorry, but she has plenty of ones that are also about, especially about the creatures out there. There's a wonderful one about the snake that ends like with 0 at the bone. Yeah, that's right. The narrow fellow in the grass that ends like and 0 at the bone. It just gives me chills every time. This one is about, draws an equivalency between a housewife and the sunset. So somebody read Emily, who's in the mood. Yes. Okay, Muriel, you want to read Emily?
219. She sweeps with many-colored brooms and leaves the shreds behind. Oh, housewife in the evening west, come back and dust the pond. You dropped a purple raveling in, you dropped an amber thread, and how you've lidded all the east with duds of emerald. And still she plies her spotted brooms, and still the aprons fly, till brooms fade softly into stars, and then I come away.
So, and one of the curious things about this one is that it's addressed with a you. This isn't an I speaking. This is Emily Dickinson, and she is concerned with her powers of observation and her relationship to the object, but it is already one step removed, addressing the object in a you. Here is a Wilbur where he addresses it in a you, but very different. I want to read this because it's so erotic. Shallow. The full cloves of your buttocks, the convex curve of your belly, the curved cleft of your sex. Out of this corm is planted in strong thighs the slender stem and radiant flower rise. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. And what's more?
Never look at a shallot and say,
That's it. So, you know, Wilbur does this thing here where he sets up equivalencies, but look at what he does. Here is the speaker, the shallot that is inspiring this imagery, but there is also the presence of the body of the lover. So what he's doing is setting up this triangle, and suddenly the riddle becomes geometric. It's not just arithmetic, okay? Or it's not just arithmetic. Anyway, it doesn't just go from A to B. Now it does this triangle thing. There is this kind of multiple relationship here, this kind of multiple connection in terms of shifting shape. The shallot is and isn't the shallot is the lover. Richard Wilbur's responses, or the poet's responses to the shallot, but to the lover, but, you know, those equivalencies. If we look at some more recent things, here's Marie Howe's Reunion. It looks like a Latin riddle. It's like, okay, this is going to be about a reunion, right? Where it names the thing it's about beforehand. Somebody who loves Marie's work, anybody? Yes.
The very best part was rowing out onto a small lake in a little boat. James and I taking turns fishing, one fishing while the other rowed slowly, the long sigh of the line through the air, and the far plump of the hook and the sinker, lily pads, yellow flowers, the dripping of the oars, and the knock and creak of them moving in the rusty locks.
And so Marie does that wonderful thing where, you know, here's this expansive lyrical moment, all that length of the day with those long vowels, the long sigh of the line. But then when she gets to that last line, those of us who are voters, who who know how an oar and an oarlock behave over years know that she is doing more than just naming something, reunion with the top line. There is something wonderful, alchemical happening in that last line, where the oar and the oarlock, there is always a bit of give. You know, an oar doesn't exactly fit in an oarlock, but that's the way they belong, with a kind of a bit uneasy fit because they're made of different materials. A wooden oar, or one, you know, where it's covered with rubber, where it hits the oarlock and the metal oarlock. What happens, what's more, when it's rusty, that kind of way that they belong together, but there's something slightly out of sync about it, out of shape, not quite at home about it. You know, so that in fact the nature of the reunion is amplified in that last line as it evolves in terms of metaphor as well, without announcing in any big way that it's a metaphor for the nature of the reunion. And that perhaps if you are not a boater, you might not even notice quite that it's happening. So again, steal these tactics, steal these strategies. Robert Haas did this with, oh wait, next one, no, let's do this one. Here's some Jack Gilbert and some Linda Gray. And again, it looks like, these two both look like Latin riddles, but it's so deceptive. So the Jack Gilbert fan, read the Jack Gilbert. Oh, it must be Jack Gilbert fan. Yes.
Each farmer on the island conceals his hide far up on the mountain, knowing it will otherwise be plundered. When they die, or can no longer make the hard climb, the lost comes year after year grow heavier with time. And the sweetness has more and more acutely the taste of that wilderness.
Since I'm an older woman, I love this poem. I must be the honey, right? Okay. The thing is, even when there's this title, Older Women, this poem does not reveal its secrets easily. So, older women, what are the older women? Are they the hives? If they're the hives, what's their relationship to man? Are the men, I mean, the farmers are concealing the hives. Is this a relationship women have with men? The men conceal their women. Is the relationship that men plunder hives? Men plunder other men's women. Is that in the poem? Is that in the metaphor? If in fact the farmer has to die or can't make the hard climb, is this a sexual metaphor? Are we talking about widows? Do widows in fact get richer because they're unharvested? Even though there is a title on this poem and you think the title is the answer, it's not. The poem continues not to quite divulge its secrets, the same way that the Anglo-Saxon riddle does. It keeps kind of shifting shape on us because it's complicated, like the mouth as a gate of hell. The same thing's true of the Linda Gray and its relationship to the title, The Secrets of Poetry. And the Linda Gray, we're almost done, so don't give up. The Secrets of Poetry. Do you want to read? Yeah.
The Secrets of Poetry. Very long ago, when the exquisite celadon bowl that was the Mikado's favorite cup got broken, no one in Japan was given courage to mend it. So the pieces were taken back to China with the plea to the emperor that it be repaired. When the bowl returned, it was held together with heavy iron staples. The letter with it said they could not make it more perfect, which turned out to be true.
So this is an ars poetica at the same time that it is this poem about this narrative poem about the celadon bowl. And when we're done with it, we don't still even quite know what it means. So does it mean, when the letter says they could not make it more perfect, does it mean they thought they were incapable of the repair? Or does it mean that actually a bowl with staples in it is the perfect thing? That does represent the poetry? I don't know. So it stays kind of open-ended, again, and it's the more interesting because of it. I can't talk about riddles in the modern world without mentioning Louise Gluck and the entire brilliant book, Wild Iris, which is everything in the world speaking to us and to each other. How is it possible that a poet write a poem called Snowdrop, and the snowdrop's going to speak? If a student told me she was going to write a poem about a speaking snowdrop, I would say, oh, sweetheart, do not go there. But Louise Gluck, there is nothing she doesn't get away with. It's a brilliant book. Just a brilliant book. Does somebody want to read Wild Iris? Where she's speaking with that capital I that is the wild iris, but is also the soul or the, who knows?
At the end of my suffering, there was a door. Hear me out. That which you call death, I remember. Overhead, noises, branches of the pine shifting, then nothing. The weak sun flickered over the dry surface. It is terrible to survive as consciousness, buried in the dark earth. Then it was over. That which you fear, being a soul and unable to speak, ending abruptly, the stiff earth, bending a little. And what I took to be birds darting in the low shrubs, you who do not remember, passage from the other world, I tell you, I can speak again. Whatever returns from the oblivion returns to find the voice. From the center of my life came a great foundation, deep blue, fountain, deep blue, shadow on an azure sea water.
I do think this poem reminds me so much of Anglo-Saxon poems, with the shape-shifting, with not being quite clear about, is the you a human being to whom the iris is addressing her song? Is it not? Is it simply the iris's other self, the self that is under the earth during the winter before spring comes, the whatever it is that is awaiting in the vault, the one that imagines each time it has died before it comes back?
I didn't get a chance before we were talking about older women. Last night and now, you made no mention of the song of Solomon.
Well, you know, there's so much to make mention of. What can I say? What I've left out is way vaster than what I included. But I think besides which, your butts will take too much, right? This one I'm going to go very fast. Now, I'm not going to read all of this. This is an exercise that Robert Haas did with his students. It's so much fun to give this a shot. He takes one image, which is this image of the snow, right? The mound of snow at the corner of Broadway and 100 thaws and freezes, freezes and thaws. And then as an exercise in shape-shifting, they come up with a whole bunch of titles that suddenly completely changes the image. Thinking that the Marines may go into Nicaragua again. The mound of snow at the corner of Broadway and 100 thaws and freezes and thaws. Good Friday, Upper Broadway, 1983. The mound of snow at the corner of Broadway and 100 thaws and freezes and thaws. It just changes entirely. Boy, talk about shape-shifting. Waiting for your call. The mound of snow at the corner of Broadway and 100 thaws and freezes and thaws. For the old Puerto Rican lady who told me furiously that there is no God, the mound of snow at the corner of Broadway. You know, this is just such a fun thing to do. Propose yourself one for every morning of the week. Get one image, retitle it every morning, and see how it shifts shape. We talked about contradiction. There are only two more to go. We talked about contradiction. We know this in folklore, like this Riddle song. I gave my love a cherry that had no stone. Right? It's like a door that isn't a door. And how can you do that? But contradiction can be taken a step further to real paradox, where those opposites are the same in a poem, which Yusuf Komunyakaa does so absolutely exquisitely in this poem of the Vietnam War. It's a poem about the war, with war images, but so many of the images of war are images of lovemaking and falling in love, so that love and war are this unified, disturbingly unified, beautifully unified, unified with difficulty thing in this poem. He danced. We never know. Besides, this is an odd title. When you finish the poem, it's still odd. And it is also a suggestion of a riddle. We never know. And what does it mean? Does it mean it's always a riddle, what this relationship is? Or does it mean that you never know what's going to happen? The unexpected occurs. He danced with tall grass for a moment like he was swaying with a woman. Our gun barrels glowed, white hot. When I got to him, a blue halo of flies had already claimed him. I pulled the crumpled photograph from his fingers. There's no other way to say this. I fell in love. The morning cleared again, except for a distant mortar and somewhere choppers taking off. I slid the wallet into his pocket. and turned him over so he wouldn't be kissing the ground. This poem is always hard for me to read. And one of the mysterious things about this poem, in the middle of this love-war metaphor, he says this thing as if it were completely clear. He says, there's no other way to say this, I fell in love. But that is the largest riddle of the poem. It's the most apparently clear moment and the most difficult, complicated moment of the poem. My students always say, oh, it's because the picture in the photograph is a woman. So when he uncrumples it, he falls in love, which is possible. Other students have said it's a family. So he falls in love with home. There he is, he's distant, he re-falls in love with home. Depending on other groups, the possibilities just keep rippling out. One possibility is that he falls in love simply with the man. That individual man, that gone life, that body, that wallet. Another possibility is that he falls in love with his own life. Another possibility is that he falls in love with life in general. Another possibility is that he falls in love with death.